Welcome everyone to another series of our Global Employability Expert Series. If this is the first time you're joining, thank you very much for being here. If this is not your first time and then this is perhaps your second or third time, then even more welcome. Thank you for being here again. So let's remind how our webinar works, okay? So we are recording this session so you can rewatch it later on or share it with someone else if you found it interesting. You can always reach out to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our many videos to our channel so you receive the different videos we have. As soon as we have a new webinar, we uploaded it, and then if you are subscribed, YouTube will let you know. We have our Q&A section and also the chat, and you can ask questions, and as the speaker is sharing their talk, then you can comment on the chat or the Q&A. You're welcome to do that. We are going to have our speaker and then for about 25 minutes, and then we can ask all the questions we have in our Q&A. So today we have a very interesting topic, which is the role of communication and soft skills in employability and leadership growth. This is brought by our speaker. Let's meet our speaker, Luis Santiago. So by training, Luis is a social communicator and professor of marketing and public relations. By profession, he's a self-taught programmer, technology project manager, and product owner with more than 14 years of experience in the IT field. So this is a very interesting profile, someone who knows a lot about communication, soft skills, and then has all this experience in IT, which we may think these are very different fields. So this is going to be really interesting. He has ventured into the areas of banking, information technology, and digital health. He was recognized in 2020 as one of the 35 innovators under 35 in Latin America by the MIT Technology Review magazine, and has participated in dozens of international forums and events exposing the need for the digitalization of health in Latin America. So what is the topic of today's webinar? Well, communicating effectively in a professional setting is a key factor in increasing employability and opportunities to rise in the ranks of any organization. Not only are communication skills not considered soft skills, they are a set of skills themselves, which include empathy and the ability to convey clearly your ideas, what is super needed and what is stopping your work, among other things, right? In this webinar, we will explore these non-technical skills that will allow you to build your path to organizational success and leadership. So thank you for being here today and welcome, Luis.
Thank you very much, Mirta. And this is a great opportunity to talk to students abroad. I would have known, I would have liked someone to tell me when I was beginning my career, the importance that communication skills, not just any sort of soft skill, but communication skills themselves have in your progressing in the, both in terms of employability when you're looking for your first job, but also in your career inside of any organization. And as Mirta introduced me, I have been working in different organizations for over 14 years. First, my story began as an entrepreneur following the footsteps of my dad, who's an excellent communicator. We always say that my dad can sell anything that he poses his mind to. He can sell oil to Venezuelans, and you know, we have a lot of oil. So that's kind of the approach that we take to things. And I had my life learning for a great communicator in order to convey my ideas and to be super effective in terms of achieving what I want. So in terms of how we see organizations every day, and this is, I think, a standard that we have in the industry, and mostly when you have technical skills, is that hard skills or technical skills are the ones that are most valued. And we spend a huge amount of time during our time in the university and afterwards when we do courses, diplomas, and honing those skills. But the fact remains that sometimes you have people who doesn't have such a huge or a great technical profile being the leaders of certain organizations. And you start wondering why these people rose above the ranks and they could have this huge, great hacker guy leading the organization, hacker guy or girl leading the organization. And you start wondering why are these guys that you see on TV with these great technical skills not the ones leading the organization? You always see the hunk, like the guy with the glasses and the suave movements being the one leading the organization. But have you thought why this person that has these huge technical skills is usually not the leader? The fact is that there's a certain point in your career when you have to migrate from your technical skills to communication skills. And when you start rising inside of an organization, those communication skills start to become even more important than the technical skills that you have. Because at some point you stop completely doing technical jobs, like quite completely. Um, as Mirta said, I am a CEO of my organization, and I am a self-taught programmer, and I haven't touched a line of code since, I guess, 2019. So it's been 2 years since I almost left the programming the job. But the fact is that I still use my technical skills to lead and to guide the team that I have. So in that sense, your technical skills become essential in organizing people, but the ones that are shining all the time are your communicational and technical skills, and non-technical skills.
So Santiago,
There's
so if
Go
I'm
ahead.
understanding right, we have like many people like to classify skills, right? In these hard skills and perhaps soft
Yeah,
skills. And you mentioned these hard skills are very specific knowledge or things we know how to do, like technical skills, IT, very specific issues, right? And then we
yeah,
have all these other soft skills and communication skills that you're mentioning. And you're saying,
yes,
hey, we may be super knowledgeable in technical stuff, but in order to rise in any organization, we need these other skills, right? And sometimes we don't
yeah,
necessarily pay attention to these other skills.
exactly. That's the message I'm trying to convey. Um, we mostly, when we go to a technical school, we learn these technical skills. We learn how to perform tasks. And usually, when you go to any type of organization, those tasks are performed by a group of people. If you become this person that cannot relate to those people performing the task, you're usually going to keep being on the technical side. And usually, people in the technical side are between low to medium in terms of the organization and how it's built. In the lower and medium jobs, there's usually technical people. But the people that actually excel in these soft skills are usually the ones that go beyond the medium height of the company and go into the management side. And why is that? Because these people have the ability to first organize people that have technical skills in order to perform certain tasks. And the second thing, and I think this is super important, have the ability to make these people get the best out of themselves. So those skills that I'm telling you about don't have anything to do with the technical task. I've been away from a computer in terms of programming for a long time, and I usually don't use those skills. There's actually a report during 2020 that was created, and it's a standardized form that's filled everywhere in the world that says which are the non-technical skills that usually hiring managers look for the best. And the five that rated the most are time management, teamwork, creative thinking, networking, and conflict resolution. And I think it's super important to say that out of those five, three are completely related to communication skills.
Can you repeat
And
those five? Sorry.
yes, time management,
Yeah.
teamwork, creative thinking, networking, and conflict resolution.
This is really interesting. We're going to touch on this later
Yeah.
on. Yes.
Now, and it's super important that 3 out of 5 are related to communication skills. So in the sense, as you guys know, probably we humans evolved to be a social species. Homo sapiens is a social species. We cannot survive on our own, and that's true. We don't have the claws of a tiger. We don't have the hunting skills of lion prides. There's no way we can make it on our own. So in that sense, we've been evolving for thousands of years into developing certain social skills that are needed to create a gregarious race that can advance, but only if we rely on each other. So that means that our most inner social formation, first, it's genetic. And second, it's depending on how we relate to people during our growth stage. But that doesn't mean that everyone relates to each other in the same way. It's actually a lot of different variables that you have to consider when you start being a communicator and you are actually trying to convey what you want and what, for example, you need. You need food, you need water, you need self-sustenance. There's actually a very good analysis of what we humans need to survive. That's called the Maslow pyramid. I urge you to reach out and look at that. So that means that each one of us achieves happiness into feeling less and less basic needs. So in order to fill those needs, we need to communicate to the people that surround us. But not everyone is born in the same quality of communication. There are certain traits that you have that you are born with. Those, for example, that we see that are natural charismatic leaders. But there are people who for whom communication comes harder. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay in a level where communication is hard for you. You don't have to be that very incredible hacker that resides on the corner of the office that doesn't communicate with anyone, because that in an organization will mean that you will stay with a technical rank and you won't be leading other people in the organization, organizing other people. So this is obviously not a webinar where I'm trying to bring down technical skills, but those technical skills are not everything in a workplace. Right?
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is like, we need communication skills, even if we're super proficient in technical skills, at a certain moment, we will definitely need communication skills if we want to go up and if we want to continue growing professionally.
Exactly. And this is super important because, as you know, organizations exist because they get energy outside of, and this is all something, a theory that's called organizational systems. There's a very good book that from some guys that are called Cats and Cans, and they talk about how organizations are systems. So organizations exist to take energy outside of the scenario where they develop themselves and take that energy and transform it either into a product or a service. Okay. And in order to have this type of communication of energy from people outside of the organization, you have to be able to reach out to them to get that energy, in terms of that energy being money, resources, etc. And you have to be able to organize the people inside of your organization, and that's why it's called organization, to transform that energy into this product or service for the outside world to take and to give you the energy that you need to repeat the cycle over and over again. So if people inside of the organization are not organized, then it's probable that the organization will fail. And what makes people work together in a scalable way in order to keep providing the tasks for what the organization exists? It's communication. And that's why people who are able to communicate, to organize in a more efficient manner, are the ones that arise inside of the organization. So as I said, usually the breaking point between your technical skills and non-technical skills is when you get into management and upper than management, because at that time you have to be a very powerful communicator. And in that sense, there's something that I wanted to bring you to. There's actually a quote that I talked with Mirta. That's from a guy that I follow, I use a lot. He created a field that's called microsociology. He's called Irving Goffman. Irving Goffman is a Canadian researcher, or was a Canadian researcher, that created the concept that society was constructed in everyday conversation. And this is super important because organizations themselves are constructed with how we address each other. You have heard a lot of, for example, about startups that have this toxic climate. You have, for example, the sayings of toxic cultures inside of organizations. We create that in our everyday interactions with people inside of the organization. And those interactions are aimed at developing a way to go to achieve the objective of the organization. So that means that people who are not only able to communicate in a very specific format, but also to be able to communicate in a healthy format, are the ones that are probably going to rise to become positive leaders of the organization. So in that sense, and going back to what Goffman says, in this construction of everyday presentation of people is created by assuming something that's called a role, okay? Everyone has roles. Actually, the concept of persona or person or people is translates into Greek into masks. Everyone wears different types of masks to go to different stages of the life. We have a persona or a mask that we use when we are in full confidence with our families. We have a persona or mask that we use in our workplace. We have a persona when we go playing soccer with our game and with our friends. We have a different persona, and that's natural. Don't feel like you're hypocritical of doing that. All of us humans do that. So in that sense, your work persona is super important in terms of rising inside of the organization. And work personas can be trained. So that means there's a certain and a lot of importance into this, making this persona better and better in order to first convey the things that you need to convey to the people that surround you. Pay attention, for example, and this is a couple tips. When people say that they don't understand you, they're not being negative and they're not evaluating you negatively. You're probably not conveying what you need or what you want to express in an easy format. And start identifying those skills that other people give you in order to start working on the skills of the persona that you need to use in order to rise inside of the organization. Second, you have to be very aware that when people are talking to you, you are manifesting a lot different in a lot different manners than just your voice or the words that you are speaking. There's something that's very important, that's paralinguistic communication. And we humans are naturally trained in order to see that. So, for example, the way that you move, the way that you use your hands in this conversation are very important as well. You don't want, for example, to have leaderships that are explosive or that use a very loud voice tone all the time. You have to, you need leaders that calm and organize people in a healthy environment. Okay, so this time I think we are evolving to organizations where these types of leaderships, people that went into a room and started screaming at everyone, those type of leaderships are left in the 80s and the 90s. We have new types of leaders. Given that most organizations usually employ millennials, and we millennials don't like to be screamed at, definitely.
So that means there's and now centennials, right? Because we are millennials. I believe that our public is more centennial.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel funny. I think it's funny when people talk about millennial, like the youngest ones, and I'm like, oh, we're not so young anymore.
We're like the fourth youngest now. We are reaching our 30s and 40s as millennials.
Yeah, so centennials are here, and we hope that they also embrace communication methods that are healthy and do not go into this old leadership style.
Exactly, and it's very important to do it. So I think to recap and to sum up, I wanted this to be a conversation of how you saw the importance of communication in the work environment. But to sum up some of the ideas that we have talked about, first, and it's very important, non-technical skills become more and more important the further you rise inside of the organization. And it's because the people that need to organize the organization need to be able first to convey their ideas clearly. Second, they need to be able to create healthy work environments so that people can develop their technical tasks in a more organized and structured manner. Second of all, and this is very important, we develop the ability to communicate and the ability to lead, perhaps, in a natural way, since we are a gregarious race. As I said, Homo sapiens cannot exist alone. They need society in order to exist, okay? So that means we have natural communication skills, but not necessarily everyone has the same level of skill. And as any skill, you probably went into the university and you didn't know anything, for example, about coding or about mathematics, and then you work on that and you progress that. Communication skills can be also developed. And developing better and better communication skills will give you a better cue to lead people, okay? The third point that I touched is that it's natural to have personas, or natural to have masks that you wear in every social scenario that you go to. And this is formed by the exercise of something that's called a role, okay? And that role, it can also be polished in order to be much more effective. There's the fourth topic that I touched upon is that you don't only communicate using your words and what people understand from you. You also communicate with your body, you communicate with your hands, you communicate with this other scenario that's called paralinguistical language. And that's very important also to address to. And the fifth one is the best way to enhance your communication skills, and this is super important, is to pay attention to what other people are telling about how you communicate. And taking those cues in order to see which is the place that you have to incentivize upon in order to make your communication skills better and be able to improve those soft skills that employers are looking for you to have in the workplace. So I wanted this to be a conversation.
Yeah, no, and I have many questions because I think what you said is super interesting. My first question would be, when you're saying communication skills, what is that exactly? How does being a good communicator looks like?
Yeah, being able to being a good communicator looks like a person that first is able to convey clearly and responsibly as well what they mean, what they want, what they need, and being able also to generate rapport to the other person that they're talking to. And rapport is a very important concept, is the idea of first being able to empathize with the person that you're talking to in order to create a language or a conversation that can be understood by the other person. This thing where we, for example, or simplify our technical knowledge for a person that doesn't necessarily understand that technical knowledge. It's how to be an effective communicator in that sense. So we need people to actually understand what we want, what we need, and understand it and take it in the best manner possible. That's how it looks like to be a good communicator.
Yeah.
To convey clearly and to obtain your objective in terms of the communication while creating the least resistance possible.
Yeah, and something that comes to mind, right? You mentioned the importance of nonverbal communication, right? Or paralinguistic communication, which is, okay, we clearly speak, we send a message with words. These words can be written or said, right? When we have not written communication, we have the option of having all these other elements, right? My hands, my voice, my face, my gestures. And when you're talking about empathy and rapport, that is super important, right? Because if I had a conversation with you and I was just taking, look, talk, that could be weird, right? You could say, Mirta, well, you're not really paying attention to me. How can we communicate if we are not seeing each other, if I cannot see your reaction? So part of being a good communicator is being really ease at using, right, our our body, our voice, our face to express this. And so I'm thinking that I would like to like reflect on how we can develop these communication skills through our workplace, especially in the context of the internship, right? One thing I can think about is, okay, definitely for this, we were talking about nonverbal communication, always having our camera on when we have a meeting with our supervisor, with another colleague, that is super important. Otherwise, I don't know if the other person is there, if it's listening, or sometimes, I can see someone is not understanding because I see their faces, right? If they're like looking like, I'm going to say, what is going on? So, right, I think that's really interesting. And a second concept that comes to my mind when you speak about communication and communicating clearly is the importance of assertiveness, right? This is quite an interesting idea, right? Assertiveness, being assertive is about not being passive and remaining like, well, I don't say anything, I don't bring up my ideas, to the next opposite, which is like, I'm aggressive because I don't know how to communicate this, right? And assertiveness is finding that middle path where I said, I convey my ideas clearly, respectfully, and from a perspective that I have the right to say this because I'm going to say it nicely organized, right? What do you think about that?
That's very important. There's actually a concept that we use usually when we study our argumentative theory. Our argumentation is a natural part of life. You will probably find people where you have a different point of views. And an argument exists when you have the same objective or object, and two people have different goals regarding that object. This argument can happen with your couples. This argument can happen inside of the workspace. And this argument is usually reframed in terms of images, okay? And for example, a person that opposes an argument has a certain image. The image can go up or low, and the other person as well. So if both people place themselves on the up scale, this will be a conflict. And usually there's two opposing means in terms of resolving an argument. When you think about arguments, you're usually talking about people screaming at each other and throwing plates. That's not necessarily. Arguments are part of life. And you study how to resolve those arguments in a peaceful manner. So in the workspace, it's super important to resolve those arguments in a peaceful manner. And in order to everyone have their images feeling respected, and feeling in a communication that usually solves the problem for both people. So it's very important on the assertiveness side to be super aware of what the other person is looking for, and to be super aware of how the person ends up when your communication effort ends. And that's something that's called empathy. And it's a super, super important skill to develop inside of the workspace.
And before asking you about that, we have a comment that says, yes, the body language is very important in any discussion because it works to communicate ideas in an easy way and adds to the discussion some movement and continuation of the discussion.
Yes,
yes,
that's
definitely
very important. Yeah.
And
I just wanted to say that's super different when you are talking to someone and you're screaming with your hands. You might be using a tone like this, but if you are doing this with your hands, you are at the same time screaming. Or for example, you are sending an email and everything is capitalized. That's screaming as well.
I was going to touch that. Thank you for that. Because I was thinking, okay, what does good communication look like in the workplace? Okay, of course, not screaming and not making a fuss. That's not how professional communication works. Also, professional communication means when we write, we need to write appropriately, right? And sending an email with capital letters may be interpreted as you are screaming.
Yes, indeed.
And we need to be very sensitive with that, but pay very attention, because no one wants to receive an email that is and you're being screamed at, right? Or if you send an email with many question marks, right? Like 5 question marks, I'm going to say, okay, this is alarming, right? So we really need to make sure the tone we use when we write, how we write, because also, of course, that communicates, right? And so if we think of how we can improve our communication in the workplace. What would you say? What concrete things we can do to make sure that we improve this communication?
I would say there's a matter of understanding what you are trying to do, what you are trying to convey before you communicate. That's the key skill of being an assertive communicator. Assertion means being able to convey exactly what you need in the best form possible. So I think the best key learning about how to be a good communicator in the workspace is first stop. Just perhaps 1, 2, 3 seconds and think what you are going to say and why. What do you want to say and why do you want to say it? That's super important. What is your objective? Any communication that occurs without a clear objective in mind, it's probably going to be not the best communication. And then stop and think how you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. That usually that 1, 2 seconds before you talk are super important in order to be an assertive communicator, but they are going to improve your communication skills drastically. Because no one wants a person in the workspace that speaks from the guts, from the belly. That's usually communication that is not assertive. There's another guy that we work a lot with. There are two guys that are called pragmatism inside of communications, are John Austin and John Searle, and they say basically you can do 5 things with communication skills. You can express yourselves how you are feeling. There's no way that anyone can say how you feel. There's an assertion of reality, and that assertion of reality is saying like something like the gate is blue, the car is green, the email is badly written. That's also an assertion that you can make. You can compromise. For example, threatening someone is a compromise. Okay, or saying I'm going to meet you there at 5 p.m. You are committing to a future course of action. Okay, you can also give orders to someone, and for example, asking something pretty please, like can you please pass the salt? Inside of that is an order. Okay, that's super important. Pass the salt. It's an action where you ask someone to do something for you. Okay, and then you have to be super aware of orders because you won't want to be the bossy guy. Okay, or the bossy girl. There's something that's called modalization to lower the intensity of the order. And there's many ways to see these objectives in terms of what do you want to achieve with engaging this communication.
Yeah.
And super assertiveness in terms of that will drastically improve your communication skills. So stop for 1 second, think about what you want to say, why do you want to say it, what do you want to achieve, and then create a strategy for yourself in order to achieve that objective while communicating in the workplace.
That is a great piece of advice that I would have loved to know when I started working professionally and even at university, right? What you're saying is super important because we sometimes tend to just open our mouth and say things, right? And
yes.
even develop our ideas while we talk, right? And so we talk and we hope that ideas come and they are organized. And unless we are super good communicators, we may need to, we really benefit from, like you said, stopping a little bit, saying, okay, what I want to get from this conversation? Okay, what is the purpose? Like you said, okay, what is the goal? Why am I saying this? What am I hoping that this brings, right? Because sometimes we said, okay, I want to talk to my supervisor to ask him for some time off. And I may not have the best words. And then I may just say like, okay, I need some time off. And he said, okay, but you cannot take it. Yeah, but I'm tired. Like, probably that's not a conversation that's going to work properly, right? Perhaps we need to say, okay, I know the company is going through a very complicated time. We have a little work. I would love to take a vacation. How I can convey this message to my supervisor so he understands that I understand the situation is tough, that I will leave everything organized and this is possible. Right? There are many things we have to think. And so stopping to think first what we want to say, I think that's a great piece of advice, thinking what we want to achieve, what is the purpose of what we're going to say, and thinking of strategies, right? And when we think of strategies, it's also like the context when this conversation happens, right? And how, because sometimes it's not the same if I know my boss is going, is in a super stressful situation, and then I want to talk to him after that, right? What can you tell us about the importance of the context and how we approach the other person?
That's super important. There's actually a couple of things that you need to take into account, and that's about empathy and rapport. Being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes, how they are feeling, what the situation might be going through, is key and essential to being a good communicator. For example, if you're talking to your boss and they're doing quarterly reports, they're probably going to be super stressed. And that's not the best time to ask for an unpaid vacation. That's probably going to blow up at your face because we're humans. And that's super important in order to know that. There's three things or three elements where you describe any communicational event that are called the text, the co-text, and the context. Okay, the text is exactly what we say, what happens inside of the communication, what are the words exchanged. The co-text is any text that is related to that event. For example, if we had a previous conversation where we established certain points, that is the context of the conversation that we are having. And the context is everything that surrounds this communicational act. Okay, so it's super important. For example, if we're trying to have a very delicate and delicate conversation, not to do it in a bar, because the other person is probably going to have trouble listening to you, and that's usually noise. Noise is also a very, very important term that to be considered in the contextual level of any communication. Noise can happen in many different ways. Noise, you can have environmental noise. You can also have ideological noise. If you're talking to a person that doesn't believe exactly the same that you do, you expect them to understand the words in a certain manner that they actually will interpret them according to what they know about reality. There's also encyclopedical knowledge, encyclopedical noise. These people have different cognitions of reality than the ones that you have. Okay, so there's a lot of elements to be here, to be planned here. What the other person thinks, what the other person feels, what the other person interprets from your words will get in the way or be favorable for you to achieve the objective of your communication method. So that's when we say strategy, it's not just planning what you're going to say, it's also planning what the other person is going to listen and understand from the words and the manner where you are speaking convey.
Yes, definitely. And so I was thinking, right? We mentioned, okay, how can we make sure that our communication skills are polished while an internship like we're doing? So we said, okay, if we always have the opportunity, turn on your camera, use your body language, use your expressions. Also, I'm thinking the importance of being open and clear, right? Sometimes when we start our first steps in our professional development, we are afraid of asking and making questions. What is your suggestion about that?
Well, I think it's very important first to, when we are starting to develop ourselves as effective, I like to say efficient communicators. You know, the difference between effectiveness and efficiency is effectiveness getting the task done. And efficiency is getting the task done with the least use of resources. So if you are trying to sell something to someone and you do 7 calls, and in the end they buy from you because you're being super insistent, but if you were much more effective and knew more about the person, you can close that same sale in 1 call. One is being effective and the other is being efficient. So I think it's super important to be efficient in terms of how you are conveying the communication that you are trying to convey. I think there's a good rule of thumb is that if you are being an efficient communicator and then you ask again to people what they understood from what you said, they are going to pretty much say exactly what you said. If you ask those people and they get something totally different, then probably the problem is not with the other person. Probably the problem is with you and the strategy that you are following to convey that context. So in these initial stages, and I think this is a norm also for leaders as well, having a few seconds, perhaps a minute, to talk to people and say, hey, I just had a 15-minute conversation with you. What is your task? What did you understood that your task is? And you will be super, super surprised at what people understand from what you said.
Yeah,
You
and this
think in your mind you said you were perfect, being super clear, and then people say like, I didn't understand.
Yeah, and that works really well the other way around. And that's a really, really powerful piece of advice that if we use it, I started using it and it really improved a lot my communication. Even when I'm being shared a piece of information, when I finish now, especially with my supervisor, I ask, okay, so what you're asking me to do is A, B, C. Did I get that okay? And at that moment, they get say, no, I didn't say A, I say I. Okay, so this is what I should do. And that always works
Exactly.
because that way I don't have any doubts. I say what I understood. The other person will correct me if I didn't understood. Fine. And then we said, okay, we're good, right? So asking to other people what they understood and asking what we saying what we understood, that's a really great piece of advice. So I would love to know if someone here wants to share in the chat if they have like some kind of piece of advice that they would like to Santiago to share, or if you're struggling with some communication issues. We can take this minutes to take advantage of our speaker who's here. So you can share your reflections or thoughts or questions in the chat. And while you do that, I also think it's good to use the internship opportunity, the experience as an opportunity to practice this, right? Write to your supervisors, reach out, express, is there something that is not going on? How can you clearly convey this situation? Perhaps it is nice to start by something interesting about conversation is that we can always design conversations. We can think ahead and say, how can I convey this better? And maybe if there's something that is not going on during my internship, I can clearly say, hey, I can start by thinking, how could this conversation work better? And like I said, well, maybe if I just start saying like, oh, this is not working, this is bad, the other person is going to be, hey, okay. Perhaps, always starting by saying, I really appreciate what's working. I'm really happy with these. I think it could be better if we did this because I'm encountering some issues here. These are my suggestions. So always being from this perspective, right? What do you think, Santiago?
I think it's super important to take every opportunity that you can to improve your communication skills. You have the great opportunity with virtual internships to be in touch with people that are normally not of your culture. And culture is also a key factor into the communicational process. You might think someone understands something in a certain way. Try speaking Spanish in different countries in Latin America. It's going to be super different. Cultures are completely different. The context of words is completely different. That's probably happening in your regions as well. So I think it's very important to take the opportunity to talk to people who are actually dedicated to you, to get the training you need in order to be employable when you end your university studies. I think it's very important. I think every opportunity that you can take to train your communication skills should be used. And this is actually a space where asking for feedback is not negative. This is actually quite positive. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, and you said a key word that I had also written here: feedback. How should we?
Yes.
How should we approach feedback? Right, essential to improve. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is about the report that you are getting. The report is usually being able to listen while you talk. I know this sounds essential, but it's not. When sometimes we are super excited to convey an idea or afraid then we are thinking about this idea that I want to transmit, but I'm not connecting what the other person is saying. If I am being, let's say, are we achieving the objective that we trace for this conversation itself? So I think the feedback side is when you do report and you get the impressions from the other person, it's super important for you to create a cycle, because communications are cyclical in nature. You exchange, let's say if you were doing a race, you would be exchanging the baton with the other person in order to convey your ideas. And it's going back and forth. If you stop listening to this feedback, then you are having a monologue. It's not a conversation. And that's super important to be aware of. The other person is going to respond in any way, and their response is as important, if not more important, than what you are saying.
Yeah, and I also think that well, feedback is information that we receive, right? Sometimes we may not necessarily agree with this information, but it is still useful to say, okay, maybe there's something going on here, right? Maybe I even believe I'm being super clear and I'm not being super clear. Being really open to receiving feedback allows us to say, okay, maybe there's something I can improve, right? And that creates a gymnastics of, well, be open to develop our skills. That is definitely true. So do we have any questions, any comments you want to do before we wrap up our webinar? Santiago said many interesting things. So I'm going to recap the ideas we are taking from this webinar, because I wrote everything down because it's really interesting. So basically, Santiago, you mentioned that, okay, we may be super knowledgeable in technical skills. That is great. Perfect if you know a lot of something very specific. But at a certain moment of our careers in a company and in our development, professional development, we will need communication skills to jump into the next level. No way. We want to be leaders. We want to be able to communicate clearly at ideas, convey them assertively, be able to organize tasks with other people. For that, we need organization, and for that, we need communication. No way around it. You also mentioned that many, right, like there was a 2020 report that mentioned what main skills leaders look for and need. And you mentioned time management, well, essential. Teamwork, definitely, we need communication for that, right? You mentioned creative thinking, which sometimes require other people to, right, test your ideas.
Exchange ideas. Yeah,
definitely. We need other people. We cannot be creative just by, we may, but it is going to be better the more people we have to exchange and test our ideas. Right now, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe it is. You also mentioned networking. Definitely, we need to be able to communicate with other people to network. And then conflict resolution. Absolutely, right? So from 5 top skills, 3 involves communication skills.
Yes.
And we also said, okay, communication is really broad, it's complex. We need our words, but we also need our body. We also need our gestures, how we say it. So for the context of our internship, always have your camera on, use all your resources. And that will allow you to create this rapport, this link with the other person, and empathy. That's the what will allow you to really be in sync, right? And then for things that we want to embrace is receiving feedback, having an open conversation with our supervisors, our team members, and really practicing this, right? Because communication is something that we need to practice, right?
Yeah, totally agree. Communication is a skill. And as you know, the definition of skill is something that you practice. There's several sides to communication. I think when you do, for example, a TOEFL, an evaluation of your English level, they're saying like the four main things, which are reading, listening, speaking, and what's the other one that they ask? Reading and comprehension.
Yeah.
So being able to comprehend what you're reading, being able to comprehend what the other person is saying, being able to speak, to convey your ideas clearly is super important. And those are skills that you develop in terms of advancing your career, being creating your profile or your role inside of the office to be considered for a promotion or to ascend to a leadership position inside of your organization. Super important to keep in touch with those skills and to develop them and be mindful of them. Mindfulness is super important in terms to develop your communication skills. Don't communicate from the gut. That would be my best suggestion. Communicate from your brain and from your heart.
Yeah, stop to think, pause, and implement all the strategies that Santiago said. So, well, thank you, everyone. I hope you had a very interesting. You enjoyed this webinar. I have myself lots of tons of notes with really interesting pieces of advice. I hope that you reflect on your communication skills and get to really practice on taking them to your next level. So by the end of your internship, you said, oh, I really work my communication skills, right? We have shared some interesting tips on how you can do that. So thank you very much, Luis. It was a pleasure meeting you. If anyone wants to stay in touch with Santiago, you have here his LinkedIn profile. So that would be El Santiago 86. So we can find you. We can just type Luis Santiago on LinkedIn and we will find him. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much. And Mirta, thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for being a great audience and giving us great questions. I hope this actually works. And I hope seeing you guys leading your organizations in some time in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.